Hello and welcome to this Tonight at 8 special from the RSGB. On the 23rd of June 2023, Ofcom published a consultation document which sets out a range of proposals they have for changes to the UK amateur radio licensing framework, the most extensive in a generation. These changes would affect all UK licensed radio amateurs, but they are only proposals, and Ofcom are encouraging all amateurs to formally respond to them. The RSGB is offering a range of guidance to help amateurs interpret and understand these proposals, and this programme is the first of two special live forums where you can ask a panel of experts your questions about these Ofcom proposals. We've been sent some questions in advance, but if you are watching this on Monday, July the 31st, then this is live, and you are invited to ask your questions anytime from now by using the YouTube chat feature or BATC messaging. Please include your first name and call sign if you have one within every question or message that you send. So now let's meet our panel, and first up is John McCullagh, GI4 BWM, who's the RSGB President. Good evening, John.
Good evening, David. Good evening, everyone. As David has told you, I'm John McCullagh, GI4 BWM, President of the RSGB, having taken up the role in April of this year. I was first licensed in 1973 as GI4 BWM, and I still have my original, partly handwritten license, would you believe, issued by the Ministry of Posts and Telecoms in February of that year. As you can imagine, in 50 years, I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of license changes come and go, but this latest consultation seems to be a real step change. And what we may be able to do in the future, of course, assuming that everything that is in the document that comes to pass. Everyone will have their own areas of interest in the proposals, and I'm particularly interested in the projected changes to repeater NOVs, gateway NOVs, and as someone who has an RSL on their call sign, you can imagine I have a very personal vested interest in that. I'm sure many of you have studied the proposed changes to the licence in some detail. If you haven't, I urge you to do so, and please do make your own representation as to Ofcom. It's very important that as many people as possible make their opinions heard. This is your chance to influence the future of amateur radio in the UK for many years to come. And now, back to David.
Thank you very much, John. Next, we have Stewart Bryant, G3YSX, who is the RSGB Board Chair. Hello, Stewart.
Thank you, David. I'm sure that a number of you have met me in various guises over the years. I'm the past president and currently the RSGB Board Chair. During my time on the board, I've been working on pretty well all of the committees that have been, or rather I've been board liaison to most of the committees that find spectrum as being one of the key elements of their work. This is an incredibly exciting opportunity, this. It's, as has been said, a once-in-a-generation chance to influence the design of the amateur radio licence. One of the things that excites me most, there are many things that excites me, but the thing that excites me most in this is the proposed supervised use by people before they get their license. And I've likened this to a trial lesson in learning to fly, or getting in the driving seat of a car for the first time and really doing it and really getting excited about what you can do. It will dramatically change the way we encourage people to take up amateur radio. I've already got a small queue of grandchildren wanting to have a go on the air before they spend time learning to do the license, and I'm sure that it will change the way we do things like the NRC and so on.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you. Back to you, David.
Thanks very much, Stewart. Next we meet Murray Niman, G6JYB, who's the RSGB Spectrum Chair. Good evening, Murray.
Good evening. So, although that sounds a slightly dry title, Spectrum, no, without radio spectrum, without frequencies, there's no amateur radio. So, Spectrum Forum looks after that level and licensing, including our liaison with Ofcom on some of this detail. And also, as we come down, band planning for operating stuff. We also deal with international matters, so our relationship with IARU, and we have an IARU conference later this year as well. So that's the role, the hat and the forum is quite wide. So we have groups like AMSAT UK, the UK 6 metre group, the CDXE, so where we've already been directly engaging with them on this topic within the forum. So in addition to this external event and next week's, we've been also conducting a series of internal engagements as well with all the specialist groups. And we're not concluded yet. That process is still ongoing. And in a little while, we'll give you an overview for tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. Our last member of our expert panel tonight is Steve Thomas, M1ACB, who's the General Manager of the RSGB. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, David, and good evening to everybody. The RSGB provides a very wide range of support for our members, and we also put on events such as this forum tonight, where as the National Society we can provide information and guidance to all radio amateurs, UK radio amateurs, on important matters. It's particularly a pleasure to actually be on tonight at 8 for the first time, especially here from the RSGB offices in Bedford for the first time as well. Although Stewart and I are very proud to have been part of the team working behind the scenes on Tonight at 8 since we started it 3 years ago, but it's great to be here on this side of it. As RSGB General Manager, I've got quite a wide-ranging remit. I lead the small but very busy team here at RSGB HQ, where I'm sitting. And here we manage membership, sales, exams, finance, the Radcom family of magazines and books as well, and GB2RS News. We also manage marketing and communications, including our links with the media and all of our online activities. The outreach and demonstration activities at the RSGB National Radio Centre at Bletchley Park, and we organise and manage events such as the RSGB convention each year. We also, of course, support our team of volunteers in their activities. The Society provides a really very wide range of technical support activities for our members, and also represents all UK radio amateurs when working with Ofcom and internationally through IARU and CEPT and ITU. We couldn't possibly cover all of the enormous range of skills and specialisms with the staff we have here. So a fantastic team of around 350 volunteers work directly with the Society and take the lead on many of those activities. We're very grateful for the work of those volunteers and couldn't possibly do what we do without them. They're an amazing team. Most of those volunteers report to the board of directors, as I do. So the Society really is a diverse team which works incredibly hard together to support and represent UK radio amateurs. Now, the Ofcom consultation that we're discussing here tonight is all about spectrum and licensing matters. So I want to focus now just on how the Society handles those areas, because it's very key to this consultation. Now, Murray Niman, G6JYB, who you've just met, I'll hand over to Murray in a moment. He's, as he said, he's the chair of the RSGB Spectrum Forum. And I just want to add a few bits to what Murray said about it. So the Spectrum Forum brings together a wide range of representatives from within the RSGB, including the spectrum managers, the committee chairs, and they cover such things as HF, VHF, microwave, EMC, OAS, Intruder Watch, ETCC, contest, propagation studies, the regional team and the board. So you can see it covers a vast range of what goes on in the RSGB. It also includes representatives from other external special interest groups like AMSAT, CDXC, GQRP, RAINET, UK 6 metre group, FOC, BARTAG, BATC, VMARS and others, plus many independent expert consultants. So you can see it really brings everything together. Now the Spectrum Forum ensures that all of the spectrum and licensing matters within the Society are properly coordinated, and they make appropriate recommendations then to the RSGB Board of Directors. Now, anybody can go and read more about the membership and the operation of the RSGB Spectrum Forum on the website, but hopefully that gives a bit of an idea as to why the Spectrum Forum, and especially Murray as the chair of that forum, are taking the lead on coordinating our response in this really very important consultation. As the National Society for Amateur Radio in the UK, we're very pleased to see so many topics included in the consultation which we believe modern radio amateurs need and expect from their licence, while trying to remove barriers to experimentation and the advancement of the technology that we all enjoy. There are, however, some areas which surprised us, very definitely, especially relating to call signs and licensing policy. So it's really important that all UK radio amateurs take this opportunity, as everybody said so far, to respond and engage with the consultation. It is a once in a generation opportunity, we think. So I'd like to hand over now to Murray, who can give us an overview of the consultation topics that we're going to focus on this evening.
Right, thanks, Steve, and for extending my introduction as well. So, as you can see on screen, the first point to note is that this is the first session of two. Tonight's session, we've tended to take a focus on what might be called full licensee issues, and that is where the majority of things like call sign policy lie, along with the repeater network and a number of other things. So if I just move on from that, so the scope we've got for you this evening, which is only a handful of slides just to get it all out there, is a little bit of background of what the current license is today, and perhaps why Ofcom wish to change a few things. We have some headline topics so we're not going to go through, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, 100 pages of Ofcom document. We will sort of dip into headlines like you're getting more power, but there's a but. There's swings and roundabouts with almost all of these topics. We've obviously mentioned call signs, and there's a couple of distinct areas, so we'll spend a bit more time on general call signs versus the very specific topic of regional secondary locators. Okay. Now, some of these things are in the license conditions, some are outside in NOVs. An example of that currently is special event stations. So they're nicknamed SES on this slide. SSES is special or special specials, and we'll come on to that. Those are the much longer, harder to get special event stations. And sort of just referring to other NOVs, the RSGB, particularly in ETCC, but not just ETCC, manage an awful lot of NOVs to nominally save Ofcom work, but they perhaps don't always see it in that light. Gateways, repeaters, beacons, special contest calls, and a number of other areas. So that's the general topics. The background is a full licensee today has been used to nominally a 400 watt power limit for many years. A few years ago, we obviously had additional conditions introduced, which if you're above 10 watt CRP, required you to consider EMF assessments, which at the time were a challenge for amateur radio, but we've risen to that, and it is those assessments which are actually providing the positive background to the changes in this consultation. It's not always 400 watts, as you know. There are a number of secondary allocations where we get less power, and it's not just at full license level. That's true of others. We have regional secondary locators. They're mandatory in the current license, or the half of them are mandatory in the current license because the club ones aren't. But as Ofcom do mention, and we'll get into this in more detail, Ofcom haven't been obliged to implement those or enforce those by the legal precedent that they now sort of go with. And that is why this is behind some of their change today. There's not the first time they've proposed changes here. They very controversially proposed a very different set of changes in their last consultation that was held in 2014 and resulted in the current license being updated during 2015. So whilst they went away, you could say they hadn't forgotten, and that led to a couple of changes. We've also had now the license outdate quite a bit, so both sides were agreed that some of the restrictions on remote control, for example, needed to be updated in line with technology and modern radios. That we examine further in foundation and intermediates, for example, where that sort of will be more of a change. So some topics will overlap next week's talk, but we'll focus, as I say, mainly on falls. Just to speed up, mention variations. So special event stations, the simpler GB single digit ones normally are automated now, but Spectrum licensing still feel that they're getting too many manual applications. The super specials are definitely manual with criteria where there's been disagreements over. Short contest calls are managed, in our case, by our CSE contests committee. Again, that's us saving Ofcom work, but there is a weak point. So although the document says no change there, it's an area we've decided to look at as well. Beacons, gateways, repeaters, which is largely the ETCC area. When I looked at the stats this morning, I think it was around about 1,200 NOVs. No, not all of them are in there, but certainly as it passed the threshold of 1,000, that did sort of wake a few folk up. And there's others. So our skills at engaging with Ofcom have given us, for full licensees, some additional experimental bands. There's permanent special event stations, which are outside and will say NOVs. And there's a special NOV for our newsreaders, because they have to be able to broadcast, which of course you might know is not in the standard license. So this time round, for the first time, we've got not only Ofcom consulting on license conditions, but call sign policy, the wider framework, has grown in a slightly ad hoc manner. And that has never been formally consulted on by Ofcom. It's got an awful lot of history to that as well. And in some respects had become inconsistent. There's good arguments as to why change it, but it's for Ofcom to propose it, and we'll discuss that. There's also some other changes. So some of the expertise that understands amateur radio and some of the current IT are both coming to the end of their time. So inevitably, they want to move to greater automation to lower their costs, but that has to be aligned with something perhaps a bit simpler that sort of rules can be written around. So coming on to the first lot of changes, the headlines. Hopefully most people know this, that in general, the default power limit is going up. So foundation's 10 watt level is becoming 20. And like with the intermediate one, that's partly due to EMF, and that's partly to align with just the more likely technology and radios you can buy. It also compensates for a slightly higher noise floor as well. The full license headline has been from 400 watts to 1 kilowatt, but, and this is the big but, as it says in red, primary allocations only. So there's a whole series of secondary allocations in your schedule where that 400 watt is staying. Now, we've already obliged to look at EMF. The threshold for starting that calculation is 10 watts EIRP. Previously, the foundation class in particular may have fallen below that. But essentially now the working assumption is nearly everything you do, apart from one new category we'll talk about, you do need to do that assessment. Or you might have to rework that assessment if you want to exercise your contest power amplifier a little more now. There's some drastically new stuff for many, many years. yeah, aeronautical mobile was absolute no-no. And here, after some interesting negotiation, again in primary allocations only, a low power allowance has been negotiated with the primary user, the civil aviation folk. So that's, we haven't gone into a lot of detail for its usage, but is, as Stewart says, is one of the newer developments that should open possibilities. It also lets us reach out to things like the hot air balloon community who run license exempt or APRS. Now, it's not all good news. Sadly, we didn't see, although we'd sort of lobbied for this, sort of improvements to the power level in top band or the missing frequencies in 5 megahertz. Now, that's disappointing for us, but you're definitely invited to sort of add to the sort of request, shall we say. And if you're putting in your responses, think where those may align with specific Ofcom questions. If you answer in a totally wrong question, the answer is often lost. So take care. Right, some other things. The suffixes we currently have, which are optional, effectively disappear from the definitions altogether. Now, generally speaking, most people still use them, but that's a sign of where Ofcom's going, basically. Mentioned remote control, but with all these things, if you actually look in the T's and C's, there's extra conditions. In some cases, they've actually tightened a couple of those conditions, so it's not a free-for-all on anything you see. Standard call signs, the key thing here is you'll only be able to hold one core call sign. So if you've come up through the exam system, and you may still be holding a foundation or an intermediate, those, whatever the lower one is, would be retired off. That's a little like BR68 used to work 40 years ago. More recent licensees won't be used to that. There's also some cases of where people are holding effectively 2 full licenses due to historical, say, more CW issues. And again, sadly, you may be forced to choose there. Of course, if you are particularly upset, reply to Ofcom. The other thing is, and this needs a little clarification, the document refers to club calls being able to hold up to 5 call signs. Now, given that some of those could be repeater groups, it's not just your standard ordinary club or contest groups. Sometimes they may have other things under their belt as well. So, whilst we see clarity with that, nonetheless, this is very much an area of the document. Section 4 is very much the area of the Ofcom document where a lot of this call sign stuff's covered. And another one, which is different, is the fact that call signs will not be a once used, never reissued again. The call sign series are gradually being used up, and Ofcom already allow unused older call signs or revoked ones to be used. They're proposing quite a short period at the moment of either you wanting to change your call sign for whatever reason, or accessing a previous call sign that might be available. We personally believe 2 years is a bit on the short side. So if you consider a different period, bear in mind the time period involved will be the governing period for all that policy area. So sometimes you don't want it too long, but that's something we'll draw your attention to. And related to that, this isn't terribly new. The sort of availability of 2-letter calls, which are essentially pre-war ones, will stay off limits for any new ones as opposed to existing ones. There's also a slight surprise in how they're going about the intermediate licenses. So we'll spend more time on this next week, but essentially the 2 series of calls are going to be mapped or transitioned over to M8 and M9 with the long-term intention of closing off all 2 series calls. sounding so far of intermediates have suggested they may like an M8 or an M9 call sign, but do let us know. And let Ofcom know. Right, RSLs, I'm sure we'll return to this in detail. You'll have heard Ofcom's proposal is that they become optional, but importantly, the nations remain defined in the license. Now, that's the key one most people will be interested in. There's other RSLs. So there's club RSLs, like an English club can be a GX, but it can be a G or a GX. So those ones remain optional, but they remain defined. And this issue about ensuring that no matter what happens, they are staying defined is important in our view. There's a new facility that, in fact, headquarters and ourselves have asked for. So if you have a coronation or some other major royal or national event, those celebratory RSLs will just be enabled by a simple website notice. No need to log on to the RSGB website for your personal NOV. There's also a new permutation of the eRSL for England, which may have limited use depending on what happens with the intermediates. But as I say here, there is a real risk that on the one hand, people will prefer to, understandably, hang on to the mandatory system we have today. But if, on the other hand, too much unclear fuss or other permutations crop up, there is a risk that the legal team who went for the bare minimum might go for an even sort of barer minimum, and that would be disruptive, I think. Some of this stuff, of course, it doesn't stop you using one. If they go optional, we already have looked at things like contest rules and a number of other areas, so it's not the end of the world, but I know it's probably the top issue. Moving on, let's speed up a little bit. We mentioned special event stations. The idea is Ofcom are going to effectively merge the two categories into one, hopefully more flexible category that you can apply online, and paper applications and a number of other permutations will disappear. I think the timing for being able to reuse an SES also shortens, which is something to watch if you think your club likes to use one and you leave it too long and some other event takes it. So even here, there's a couple of other things. We know from the past year or so that some real classic and perhaps previously used call signs, like very short ones like 2MT or 2LO, BBC Centenary, even they couldn't get that from Ofcom. So it's very much GB and whatever you like after it. There could still be one or two exceptions, but we think it's going to be increasingly less likely. And then finally, I will come on to what is quite a large and complex area, but what I've done here is summarise the Ofcom scheme and where it's going in a table. So if you hear the highlight that you don't need an NOV, anyone can have a repeater, no need to ask or coordinate, that is not true. The main repeater network, which is the 25 watt repeaters, which account for a very high proportion of those NOVs, will still require coordination and a process in which you'd engage with RSGB to get your call sign, but that would be a badge of being coordinated, essentially, more or less what happens today. Where there is a real difference is when it's under 5 watt CRP. So the gateways have always been low power, but there's other things down there. So technically, unattended whisper operation today, which is very popular, has breached the unattended license conditions, but we were loath to insist on 1 watt or 100 milliwatt NOVs. It's ridiculous. So having that flexibility and pure NOVs down there is something Ofcom in particular was keen on. How we manage that at band plan and operating level is a keen interest of myself, John McCullagh, and a number of others. You'll notice that true NOVs remain for a small number of high-power propagation beacons. So it is a change in management in parts. It does open up some brand new possibilities, though. So the 5 watt category, as I said, isn't limited to gateways. For the first time, ad hoc low-power local repeaters may sort of be doable. And whether that's in-band with expensive cavities or cross-band, debatable, but there's certainly options there for us to vary the things we do. And I think on that point, we come to the final part of the introduction, and that is, apart from what you've seen here, there's more in the document. Do take a look at it. The RSGB license review shortcut that you see on screen there takes you to a page where we've got links to our separate overview video and a number of other bits of advice. And on that note, back to David.
Thank you very much, Murray, and thanks to all of our panel for that introduction. So the things that Murray has just talked about are the sort of things that we were trying to cover tonight, and other things will be covered in a week's time. But before we start, a reminder to ask your questions as soon as possible on YouTube chat or BATC messaging, and we'll fit in as many as we can. And a tip that you can make this picture fill your screen on most devices, either by double clicking on the screen or pressing the full screen button. Now we're going to read you firstly one of the questions we sent in advance, but before I do that, just to show this is live and that we are responsive and we really care about trying to explain stuff tonight, I couldn't help but notice a message from Roger Taylor, who says, I've been licensed since the 70s and don't know what half these acronyms are. Well, there are quite a few acronyms that Murray's using those slides, although most of them are fairly universally accepted, Roger, and most of them are also explained in the Ofcom consultation document. So I would urge you to have a look at that. This is the address, as Murray just put on the slide, this is the address that you can go to now to get directly to that Ofcom. It's rsgb.org/license review. And on that page is direct links to the Ofcom consultation document. And in there, you'll see acronyms explained firstly, or as somebody else said, you can have a look at the internet. Anyway, let's move on to our first question tonight. This was sent to us in advance, and it's from John Warburton, G4IRN. Will the RSGB be submitting a response, and what weight does it carry? Who'd like to take this?
I'll start, and then, of course, the others can carry on. So as Spectrum Forum Chair, I'll get the interesting short straw, I guess, of coordinating our response. We will be submitting a response. It'll be inevitably quite long and complex, so we're unable to share that in great detail in advance. And what we would also like to avoid, which has happened before, is where we have put out very detailed guidance, if not the final sort of reply, for people to say, we support the RSGB view, or directly copy the words out from one of our bits of guidance. Ofcom do not put a lot of weight on replies like that. It is incredibly important for individuals and groups or stakeholder groups to put their own tailored responses in. If there are areas where you don't understand or want to liaise with us, so as we are liaising with some of the groups mentioned in the Spectrum Forum, then yes, we're glad to assist or clarify some abbreviations or point out where we think there's perhaps some drafting issues. But we will be doing that. So the weight, how Ofcom weigh responses, they have their own methods. I can't prejudge it. Obviously, if 2,000 amateurs reply uniformly on one issue, they're clearly obliged to take some notice of that. But clearly, expert stakeholder groups, because we've got the skills, if anything, we've got a bigger skill base on some of this stuff than our colleagues. But no, we are listened to, but it is not RSGB. It's also, just to be clear, we're not replying purely parochially for our members. We are replying, when we do, on behalf of all UK radio amateurs as well. So that's all I'll say there.
Thank you, Murray. Can anybody else like to come back on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we know that Ofcom are looking for a really good representational view from as many amateurs as possible. We know that Ofcom, they watch our social media channels. They will be watching this video, I can guarantee it, because they will have watched Murray's previous videos and things like that. So they are absolutely honestly looking for as many responses as possible, not just the boilerplate response that could be the RSGB one, as Murray's said, but Ofcom may have had hundreds of replies. They need thousands of replies, and it is a huge opportunity for us to reply. So everybody should. And to be honest, everybody has slightly different views, and we understand that as well. There's some things in the consultation that seem obvious to most people that they're positive, but there's also some tricky areas in the consultation as well, and a lot of those come down to personal preference. So everybody should respond, absolutely.
Okay. Anybody else like to say anything? John, Stewart, do you have any views on this?
I suppose that I'd say that in some cases it's going to be impossible for us to represent the entire spectrum of responses and to gauge it, just because so many people have different views, and that's why it's really important to express your own view, particularly around controversial subjects. So effectively, we would be submitting a vote to Ofcom rather than the considered view of the national organisation.
Fine, okay. Well, thank you very much for those views. I'm going to come to on first. Well, it's just more of a point, I guess, rather than a question. But this is from Mark 2M0XZA on YouTube. Not having access to funds for amplifiers and not seeing my circumstances changing. Proposals do nothing to entice me to advance to full license. 100 watts leaves me to as satisfied as an intermediate. What's the thoughts of that from the panel?
Well, there's still some, I think there's still some encouragement if you want to operate abroad or anything like that. That's the first one that comes to mind, that Murray's probably got more in his mind than just that one.
Yeah, so there's what we haven't listed here, because we didn't have time, was to list full license, even with the changes, the full license only territory. And that includes the travel aspects, additional experimental spectrum, I think some of the other NOVs still remain full license only. But the other thing is, one thing I do as part of my function is I look at trends in licensing over years, the so-called demographics of the hobby. And it's true today that when we look at exam passes at foundation and then those ones who do go up to intermediates and then beyond, yes, there is a difference in the trending there, and we would expect over the very long term that the balance between intermediates and the older full licensees, many of whom are in the CBB, may change somewhat. And we can't force people to upgrade. It's carrots rather than sticks, or your desire to just prove that you can do it, perhaps.
Good point.
Well, the desire to learn. I mean, amateur radio, amongst many other things, it's both an operating hobby and a technical hobby, and quite often to get the best out of operating, you need to know about the technology, and if full helps you along the pathway to learning more about radio and electronics, it will, I believe, also help you along the path to having better station performance. And it's fun.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Just coming back on Mark's point there, Lawrence came and said reciprocal SEPT agreements to allow full licence holders to operate in many other non-UK countries is a good reason to upgrade. I think Murray mentioned that as well, beyond the foundation and intermediate that was. Although not maybe quite agreeing with that necessarily, was Andy M0NKR says exactly by increasing the power limits for foundation and intermediate means there's no reason for those licenses to progress in the hobby. So there's already obviously mixed feelings about increasing the power levels. Any other views on that? John, maybe we haven't heard from you yet. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, they're increased, but they're only 3 dB when you think about it. So it's not a huge increase. Okay, it's double the power, if you like, in terms of 50 watts to 100 watts, but it's only 3 dB. It's not much in terms of S points. So I don't think it's going to make an awful lot of difference unless you're, on a very high performance station or something like that. So I think it's probably fair enough. And also, when you think about most of the, for instance, mobile rigs, keeping them to 10 watts is rather difficult. So 20 watts is probably a more sensible limit for those anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, if you've got any other views on those or questions, don't forget to pop them onto BATC or YouTube, and I'll read as many of them as I can. Next, we're going to move on. Please, as well, if you can remember to put your call signs. I know some of you, but I'm not going to be able to remember everybody's call sign, even the people I know, really. So if you can put your call sign, if you have one, that helps. The next one's from Steve Morton. If Ofcom are so keen to reduce their workload on NOVs, why not hand it all over to the RSGB, updating some of the documents and conditions, but essentially keeping the coordination that we currently have? Who'd like to take this?
I'll take that one.
John.
Yeah, I'm kind of agree with Steve, because there does need to be some coordination. Otherwise, there is going to be chaos, and it's not quite spelled out how this harmful interference that they talk about is going to be prevented, or if it does happen, how it's going to be stopped. And I'm sure Ofcom don't want to be involved in enforcement because they're trying to get away from that. So there still needs to be some coordination, and I'm sure the ETCC would be very happy to do coordination, even if it is a lower level than what they're doing at the moment, just to make sure that the bands are properly looked after and protected, particularly in the repeaters area, where there are lots of repeaters, and if you start sticking repeaters in there at 5 watts, they're going to do all sorts of issues unless they're properly coordinated, to cause all sorts of interference. So I think there's definitely a case to be made for coordination, perhaps not just as tight as the coordination has been, but some sort of coordination in the future. So I do agree with Steve.
So, well, I agree with John on the main network, but absolutely sure. One of the things this new license change allows us to do is to have pop-up repeaters. So if you're doing a 4x4 event or a scouting event where you need radio coordination, the license appears to give you the ability to put one up just for the event, run it for 24 hours, and then take it down again. And one of the challenges I see is how to coordinate those in a timely and appropriate way.
Yeah, I see that as well, Stewart. That is a problem. If somebody puts up a pop-up repeater, that's grand, as long as it's properly coordinated with any other pop-up repeaters or the fixed network that's about there. So it does need to be carefully planned.
Okay. Anything else on that from anybody? I want to try and get as many things as we can. We're getting quite a few questions and points asked, although they are a little bit all over the place on YouTube. Yes.
David.
Yes, Murray.
Right, so going back to my other slight hat on band planning, and I happen to be an NOV holder for a beacon, a gateway, and a few repeaters. So I do have a little bit of background. And the spectrum managers recognise that the main repeaters aren't going to change enormously, but it's this newer category where not just the category, but if you notice the table I had, it includes some degree of foundation and intermediate access in this new category as well. So clearly there'll be a demand. They're very ad hoc, and our preliminary belief is that although we've got existing gateway channels coordinated, we may well look at which slots in the spectrum can be reallocated from within the existing band plans to ad hoc use. So there may well be some degree of frequency separation to address that. The other thing is because there's a hidden catch, and we're becoming more careful on this. So the definitions for beacons, repeaters, and gateways have been around in the NOVs. Beacons have been in the existing license for some time, so they had more background, but not the other two. Once they're defined in the main license, they have the potential to catch other ad hoc activities with those conditions. So RANET talk-through permits, cross-band use, and a number of other ones, we believe, if the drafting isn't very careful, those will actually get more constraints than they have today. So with the relevant groups, ETCC, RAINET and some others, we're going to be looking very carefully at detailed drafting changes and proposing these to Ofcom. So this is a good example where if you think the majority of the license conditions look positive and you just reply yes to question 17, that endorses all of it in one block with no qualification. So going back to one of our earlier points, if you have a concern over one particular area, be aware of how Ofcom sets their questions out, especially as some of their questions may have more than one issue within the question. So we gave some guidance in our general YouTube introductory video on questions and answering. And yes, caveat, tread with care and read the small print and reply carefully.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Murray. Well, we're hopping about a bit. Now, this is something I think that's going to be covered more next week, but we ought to just touch on it. Terence 2E0IPK says, will this mean that the books that accompany the licence levels will be replaced altogether, or will there be just amendments issued? My other half wants to do her foundation and has the current book, but I guess that a lot of people will be in your position, Terence, so maybe we could just cover that briefly, panel, and also refer to people next week when we'll be looking at foundation and intermediate in a rather more detail. Who'd like to take that?
Murray, I think you're in the exam team, aren't you?
Yeah. So I get in a few places. So I am a member of the Exam Standards Committee, where Ofcom gave a sort of partial briefing that there were changes coming, and of course not whether it's the syllabus, the question bank, or the books, if there's a license change, it has an impact. We expect that because of these changes being relatively extensive, that the only way forward is for the exam team to focus very strongly just on the Ofcom changes and nothing else. They've already started some of their work to ensure that all that material will be ready in time for, I think, around about March next year, when this comes into effect, because I know that syllabuses have to give clubs, trainers and pupils best part of 6 months notice. So there is quite a challenge there. All the technical stuff is likely to stay the same for now, but we'll have Tony Kent, who's the chair of the exams group, as part of our session 2, where a lot of that will be, we'll have the time to look at that in depth, I think.
And the changes to the books really depends on the changes to the syllabus, doesn't it? So one leads to the other. If it was just a small number of changes, then we tend to put erratas to the books. But if there's a large number of changes to the syllabus, which there could be, then that tends to be a reprint to answer the question sort of specifically, but it does depend on the syllabus change.
This might be a good time, panel, wouldn't it be, to look at the sort of timelines that the Ofcom document touches on in there, and it's going to be in 3 phases, I understand. The first phase possibly being announced later this year, as you've said, Murray. The consultation finishes early September, but they hope to publish some of the results before Christmas. And then there's another 2 phases, phase 2, which with some of the things will be changed immediately, and then phase 2 and phase 3. So could we just quickly cover those sort of 3 phases for everybody watching, and then maybe we can move on to something else?
It's in on page 58 of the Ofcom sheet. Is one of the places where it is, and it talks about the 3 phases. So they're hoping that later in this financial year, there will be the phase 1, which will be a license variation, and that will bring in things like third-party unsupervised, so that third-party supervised operation, RSLs, call sign prefix provisions, etc., transmit power. In fact, all the sort of easy things to do that don't need anything in their licensing software to change.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. By the way, sorry, Stuart, to interrupt, but just to let you know as well, the panel know, that we've just put up that that actual page from the document. It's page 58, as you said, section 7, which talks about the timelines. Sorry, go ahead, Stuart.
It then goes on to the next page, by the way. It's quite a long list, but basically anything that doesn't need them to touch their licensing software is what they're going to do, they plan to do. And then in 2024, they don't say what date in 2024, the plan is to introduce the new M8 and M9 call prefixes, do their restriction on the number of call signs that people can have, and liberalise the use of special event station NOVs. And then there's a third phase, which should come in the 2024-2025 financial year, which is things that provide that require them to do significant software engineering, and I believe move to a new system. And that's things like an improvement to the online revalidation system. So you'll no longer have to go in and put a dot somewhere or other for it to log what you've actually done. It's going to be a proper validation system. Then they're going to get people down to their single call signs. I presume that they'll have the better tools for finding out who's got what call sign by that stage. And introduce a wider range of unused call signs to be available. So that's presumably where they're going to start to put unused call signs back into the pool again, and introduce the ability to change your call sign from time to time. So it's in 3 phases between now and financial year 24 to 25, with my reading of it, the biggest changes happening really quite soon.
Yeah, so a reminder to everybody at home that you can access that full document either directly on the Ofcom website or go via the RSGB website, license review website, and then you can get a link directly to it there. And we should, of course, remind everybody again that these things are not necessarily going to happen. You know, this is what it's about. It's a consultation. So it really is up to everybody, all of us radio amateurs, to respond to this. And as someone said earlier, you know, the more people that respond is really going to mean a lot more. I had someone actually say the other day that, you know, 100 people responding will mean more than one club entry or even the RSGB entry. It's individual views that the Ofcom will have to listen to. So don't forget to do that. Now we're going to move on to one of the more controversial things. We've got a few questions on this, so bear with me, panel, and I'm going to cover a couple of them that have been asked live and also a couple that have been asked in advance. The first one I can see on RSLs, this is Rick M0LEP, says the RSLs are effectively already optional in 2 circumstances. First, when there's a special RSL, and second, for any GB special event station. And also another one, I'm just going to find that if I can. There's quite a few coming in and they're all over the place of different messages. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to 2 advanced questions and I'll see if I can find that in a moment. These are questions that were submitted in advance. If you've got questions for next week and you'd like to issue them in advance, you need to do that by 12 o'clock on Friday, midday this coming Friday. This is for next week. Anyway, this is the question from Hugh, GM0HSC. With the change to regional locators coupled to allowing anything as a suffix, if I go Mountain Mobile up Ben Nevis, I will legally be allowed to operate from the summit as G0HSC/MM. Are these changes not opening the doors to ludicrous, misleading and frankly daft possibilities? And then another similar question, this time from John Warburton, G4IRN. Regarding the proposal to allow any suffix to a call sign, I am concerned about the use of meaningless and arbitrary suffixes. Is it possible that the Society could put itself in a position whereby it approves the use of suffixes for particular events or award schemes, thereby retaining an element of control? So there we are. We're starting to talk about RSLs or regional locators. Who'd like to take this question first on the panel?
Yeah, can I... Dave, technically, those 2 questions are the suffixes in particular. The was only a little bit on RSL. So yes, it's true. There's an existing possibility, limited possibility for celebratory RSLs. That's just being made easier. So there's no radical change there. The mandatory RSLs, I presume you're going to find a more interesting question on those. The suffixes is quite another matter. Now, today, we've got suffixes which are optional, but 4 of them are defined in the license. So if you happen to use one of the ones that are defined, you've got to obviously stick with that meaning. But anything else is essentially outside the license. So people who say /portable or /QRP, technically, they're well understood by the amateur community, but they're outside the license. It could be /anything. There's 2 controls on that, and it's not necessarily where RSGB want to act as a regulator or guider. And the first control is the universal and ITU sort of very legal requirement to be clearly identifiable at all times. That was introduced in 2015, and it applies not just to your voice or CW transmission, it even applies to embedded call signs in some modern digital radios as well. So that means that if it's clear and mounting mobile, today /mm would clearly be an issue. But if you're spelling that out as mounting mobile and you're potentially up for mounting on a SOTA event, that's fair. There's obviously some schemes that RSGB endorse. So we obviously had the /NHS scheme, and we've had a few others during recent events. So those are fair as well. The one area which is lurking in some supporting material, I think John Warburton mentioned, is where for some foreign countries, instead of the CPT style prefix for this, it's suffixed. And that would be where you're giving a very unclear one. So technically, there is still a license clause that potentially guards against that sort of misuse, along with other clauses that would prevent offensive suffixes as well. Whether Ofcom actually enforces those rules is a secondary issue, but it is. Even in this area where it's optional, there's still a few things that can apply.
I was going to say, Murray, that problem of enforcement is it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because we know that Ofcom are trying to make the rules within the consultation to avoid having to make those sort of judgment calls, but it is very difficult to find that balance in between what would be giving effectively misinformation or break some international standard, but allow the flexibility. Sorry, you were going to say.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Stewart.
So most of the discussion on this I've seen is about classical operating. So, contesting or out in a park somewhere or something. We also need to realise that the suffixes are quite often used for technical reasons as well. So, for example, it's quite common to see whisper transmissions with multiple suffixes, where someone is comparing different characteristics of their station over a period of time, and wants to see, distinguish who heard them on their vertical versus who heard them on their beam, or who heard them at 1 watt versus who heard them at a picowatt or whatever. So they're used for those sorts of technical tests. They're also used when you can only have 1 call sign per person. Then how would you get 4 things each in a corner of your field to talk to each other and exchange information without a unique call sign for each transceiver? So suffixes have all kinds of technical applications as well as the classical operating applications.
Okay, have any other view on that? John, do you have a view on this?
I don't really have a view on suffixes at all. Prefixes would be the one that I would be interested in, for obvious reasons.
Okay, well, I'm going to find that question. I had it a moment ago.
We should get to prefixes. I'm sure there's lots of people want to discuss.
I think so. I'm just going to try and find that now. Okay, there we are. And I found the person, but not the message. There's quite a few messages from the same person, and I'm just trying to group them together at the moment. I've only got a similar tool to you at home to see these, so there are quite a few of them. Let me see if I can find that now. It was about, basically, I don't want to get the question wrong. Their view was, No, I can't find it. It was from Steve M7DPV, I believe, Stephen Black, and he was saying that in his view, either everybody should have to use the RSL, and including England with an E, or nobody at all. That's what was his view, I'm pretty sure, and I hope I haven't misrepresented you there, Stephen. What is the panel's view about that? We're talking about RSLs. Regional secondary locators, I should add as well, just so we're not using too many acronyms.
You want to leave this, John?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with them being optional as long as people in their nations actually use them and use them all the time. So it's not really optional for us. If it means that in the end G stations, if you want to call them that, have to use GE, well, some of the people in the nation would say so be it. They may not be too happy, but I think it should be left the way it is, honestly left the way it is, as a more or less custom and practice that people in the nations use RSLs and English stations use G or M or whatever. I think it should be left. I think there's been quite a groundswell of opinion that will probably follow that as well. We want to keep our RSLs. We don't want them optional, but we don't want to impose anything on anyone else. We really don't want to impose anything on anyone else, but we would really like to keep our RSLs.
Okay, I mean, if RSLs become optional as proposed, what happens in contests in which there is a country multiplier or a bonus?
Well, so this has been discussed in the contest team, and the general view is that if we need them for multipliers, they will be in the contest rules. So if I imagine that what's going to happen is if you are not in England and you don't give an RSL, then you'll probably be DQ'd. And if you are in England and you give a misleading one, I suppose, well, I don't know. Anyway, the plan is that that they will be in the contest rules will specify what you do. There are some contests where there are no country bonuses, and there's talk about maybe omitting them. But my recollection of the last meeting was that at least for the next year, things will be exactly as they are today, and then that'll give people time to work out what the right thing to do is.
Okay, thanks, Stewart. I think we're going to get quite a lot on RSLs. If I could ask everybody at home, I know we're encouraging all your questions, but if you have questions or points to make specifically about RSLs, maybe I can ask you to ask them now on either BATC messaging or YouTube chat. That would be helpful.
Can I say something else, Stewart?
You can. Could I just add one comment that we have, Fred, from somebody, from Rick M0LEP. The RSLs are effectively already optional in two circumstances. First, when there's a special RSL, and second, for any GB special event station. But John, over to you.
Yes, if they were optional, G stations, for want of a better word, without an RSL, could come to GI and still be G stations, whereas if I was using my optional RSL, I couldn't go to G and sign GI there. So I think there's a bit of discrimination there against the nations.
Okay. Other thoughts?
David, can I just come back on that special event one? With one or two exceptions, there have never been RSLs as a matter of course within the special event stations. They're always been GB, no matter which nation you've been in. There have been some exceptions, and I know those people with a particular interest in this are perhaps a little miffed over the Ofcom plan, and so should lobby in that respect. But the GB series, whether it's for the repeaters and gateways or for special event stations, has always been separate from the location-based RSLs that people are talking about today.
Thanks for that.
Of course, those people who take, when we do those, the celebratory ones, like an R or something like that, the trouble is when somebody who's already got an RSL wants to use that, they have to give up their RSL. So it's at that point, John would lose his national identity if he wanted to use one of those celebratory ones. So that's where I understand what the question means. It becomes optional at that point whether you decide to keep your national identity or take the celebratory one. It's not both. So
a special case though.
Yeah.
It's a special case, isn't it, Ray?
Yeah.
Can I put a point in here that Nick Totterdall at G4FAL has made? RSL was invented by the Radio Communications Agency. No such thing when most of us were first licensed. GM was the prefix for Scotland, not G with an M added on. I'm not sure if that helps anything, but panel, what do you think?
Yes, well, my license was actually issued as GI4BWM. I actually have the handwritten license, as I said, and it was actually issued as GI4BWM, not G4.
Okay, any other feelings?
Yeah, so that sort of embedded or direct sort of prefixing in some licenses, not all of them, was what caused a near disaster in the 2014-2015 consultation, because when Ofcom lawyers realised that, they said, well, if you're GI or GM, you've got to stick with it because you're not allowed to vary it when you go to a different part of the nation. And when I remember being at the convention and Ofcom presented this idea, and needless to say, from a DXCC and operating point of view, it sort of risked utter chaos, quite frankly, and undermining of DXCC. So ironically, the reset of those was caused by our own nervousness over this very same issue several years ago. Going back to the origins of them, technically, they weren't there originally at all. They were basically lobbied for way before by essentially RSGB enthusiasts at the time, because of course when the current sort of calls, G, M and 2 were assigned to the UK at the end of the 20s, that's all it is. The ITU who are control the initial country prefix. All it is 2G or M. After that, it's purely a national decision, really. So the only obligation on Ofcom is to stick to those. Unfortunately, because the way they sort of didn't quite get it right, that's caused a difficulty for the intermediate calls, which is one of the reasons they're changing. But they've gone through some permutations as well over the years. They're clearly highly embedded in people's identities, but it's all a question of, do you leave alone, which is certainly one option, or does Ofcom sort of move ahead to some degree, but respecting our view on it?
Well, it's all about, as we've been saying all this evening, it's all about responding with whatever you think. For example, a couple of people have put their thoughts. Ian Munro says, I like having the separate RSOs for the different nations. To make them optional would confuse things. And another view from Dave Parkinson, I'd like to keep the RSLs, proud to be a 2I0. So there we are, and I'm sure there's lots of other people who feel similar. Before we move off RSLs, is there any other views from the panel on this?
I'll just give a final reminder, whichever side you come from, the one thing we don't want is for them to be lost from the license text, whichever it is. Keeping them defined, as I mentioned in the slides earlier, is pretty fundamental. If they disappear entirely, you get domestic chaos, but that's also where the DXCC issue crops up as well. So having the nations recognised, Ofcom seem to have done. Whether or not they've recognised them enough is the key issue, I think.
Do you want to comment on mobile devices, Murray?
Oh well. So I briefly mentioned sort of embedded sort of call signs. So there's a number of cases, whether you're mobile, handheld. A lot of this tends to be in VHF and up, where you're more likely to be with mobile equipment. It will also apply technically for airborne usage as well, and marine usage. So as you cross borders, internal borders, I should say, the current license obliges you not just to change your voice identity if you're driving mobile, but technically, certainly if it was a D-Star radio or some of the others where your location and call signs are embedded, then yes, technically you should switch to an alternative program memory. Otherwise, the digital information will be misleading or in conflict with your other information. So that wasn't a case many years ago, but because of the nature of the technology, that has sort of added to the rich picture on this. Is where I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. Well, we've talked about RSLs quite a lot, but if you have any other thoughts on them, please add them. Now, Dave Lawley has submitted a question, and we've summarised it saying, why is the GB the only prefix to be permitted for special event stations, SSES? The Olympic call sign 12L would no longer be permitted. So what does this achieve? If you'd like to take this.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take it. I was a cough. Sorry, I meant to mute.
That's okay. Anybody like to take that? It's really basically about prefixes and the changes that are proposed to SES's special event stations or SSES's special event stations, which of course could go on for much longer. They could be, I think, for up to a year, an SSES, like GB100 BBC, for example, was one that lasted all year for an event of national importance. This is what, from my memory anyway, of the reading up I did on the consultation document this weekend, whereas an SES is normally shorter at the moment and can be only up to 28 days.
Something I would suggest is that this is very much a topic that people need to write in and express their reviews and ideas on. Ofcom will only, I think, will react, or we only had a chance of getting them to allow a richer set of call signs if we write in and explain the reasons for it. It is a bunch of investment for them, so I think they would need to see the strength of feeling.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter that the RSGB can do anything about it other than encourage people to do exactly that, Stewart. I mean, we don't really have any influence at all, other than saying, you know, people are feeling very strongly about this. But as Murray says, it might be difficult because of the issues, as we already know, as he mentioned, 2MT, etc., not actually being available to the BBC. So this could be difficult. What do you think, Murray?
Yes, Ofcom have clearly significantly tightened certainly what might be called the prefix first, or the format of special event stations in one way. So you know, quite recently we had the birth of British broadcasting, which was 2M o'clock at Brittle, 100th anniversary, hugely celebrated. Needless to say, we couldn't get 2MT by itself back on air. It had to be a GB100 2MT was our solution at the time. More recently, as you said, we had the 2LO, which was the successor station, which was the start of the BBC. Again, they dug their heels in over that. And yet I was involved with the Olympic calls. So there's been a changing of view. Where they're becoming more flexible is any combination within the GB series, and those time limits are going to look as though they're more flexible as well. So in that respect, that sounds positive, but they're clearly trying to keep the policy consistent, because this is an area where they're going to automate it. The concept of lots of individual ones where a skilled policy chap in Ofcom will be the judge or aid, that era is disappearing. So if you have a particularly strong view, or and they'll remember some of these past precedents, by all means write into them. But we've already explored some of this area ourselves, and it's a bit of an uphill one.
So Murray, do you think they would allow? Well, do you want to go, Steve, first?
Okay, thanks, Stuart. I was just going to say, in the consultation, there is a somewhat liberalisation of the call sign policy around here, with longer call signs being available. But there's some interesting footnotes in there. I saw the same question that came in from Dave Lawley. And in the footnotes, it says that you can't have a GB that starts with a 3 or a 7. Well, that's to stop the conflict with repeaters. But that also seems to suggest that you can't have a GB 75 as well, which could be a problem. So I think there's some room in the response to the consultation to say that just the first single digit can't be a 3 or a 7 or something like that. So it's an extension of the wording and the footnote that's in there to make sure that you're not cutting off a whole option that could be in there. But it is absolutely true that Ofcom seem to have been squeezing down and not allowing those, the call signs that Murray just mentioned, that David mentioned, 2MT, 2LO, etc. So I think there's definitely some room in there for comment and possible expansion of the special event. But I know some of the special events have been particularly tricky. Like the big coronation one it took an awful lot of push, didn't it, to get the ones that we knew were justified. So I suppose on the one hand we welcome some of the liberalisation, but the definition tends to still be a little bit too tight in some areas. Sorry, Stewart, you were going to say.
No, I think you covered most of it, Steve. I was going to point out again. I saw Dave's thing about with the various numbers, non-single digits. I don't know whether it's software and IT stroke rule constraints that they're trying to work within to sort of simplify decisions. But it would seem that perhaps we could ask them to consider non-single digit ends when in the form RSL, G or M RSL number format.
Okay.
It depends on whether their software can go with 100 instead of 1.
Yeah. I think you could also give them the benefit of the doubt that perhaps the document drafting wasn't quite as clear as it might be, because they've clearly, in fact, GB75, if you do a search through QRZ, and I've done a couple of GB75s, there's an awful lot of established examples where there was no issue policy-wise if it was a significant event. So we just need to be clear that other than avoiding the repeater and beacon conflict, that should be doable.
Okay.
The best thing to do is to talk to them, to ask them.
Okay, panel, thank you very much for those. I want to move on because we've got quite a few other topics and questions to get through. Next question's from Essex Ham, from UK Amateur Radio, obviously a group, represent a lot of people who've learnt and taken exams through them, and as well as their members. Thanks to Murray for the excellent summary of the changes. To follow up on the question about the RSGB's formal response, are there any specific proposals that the RSGB is opposed to? Who'd like to take that? Somebody, please.
So we can't say there are areas we're clearly concerned with, but given that we haven't written our own reply specifically, it's not so much there. We are disappointed in some areas, and we've alluded to a few areas during this evening where they didn't address them, like top band and 5 megahertz. So to some degree, we've been spotting the drafting issues, you could say, or the gaps, because this is a golden opportunity to go at those. To be fair, a lot of it's welcome. RSLs, we're basically going to ensure that they pay attention to the responses. I think is the simple statement on that for the moment, but as you've heard, there are a few permutations in there as well.
I think it's more around the edges than actually objecting. There's things that we need clarified, things we need cleared up. The various power levels, the 5 watt unattended stuff, all those sorts of things. What does it actually mean? What frequency bands will they be allowed in? All those sorts of things need cleared up. Probably also the reissue of call signs after 2 years. Some people I know are doubtful about that, and we might think of asking for a different time limit. Those sorts of things. I don't think there's anything we positively actually object to. We just need clarification.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for that. Now a question from David Hay, M0TGC. Currently, RAINET uses user service when running events. Is there any change that is going to affect this?
I'll take that. Yes, is the short answer. And the RAINET groups and board or management committee are very aware of this. The current license today, obviously does refer to user services, but it's rare we have emergencies. So a lot of day-to-day activity tends to be with more voluntary groups, St John's Ambulance and Co. Those are defined in the current licence. Those voluntary groups, unfortunately, we think have been stripped out of the proposed licence on the grounds that they don't have statutory status. And therefore there is a legitimate concern as to whether this may affect sort of standard community events as opposed to emergencies. And those community events are quite vital for training and procedure development, etc. So that's a very good area where we've spotted the issue. We don't necessarily have all the specialist skills in-house. So we've asked our RANET representative in the Spectrum Forum to develop their response with good detail and do so in good time so that we can potentially endorse that. And there's a few other areas where we've been identifying this, where to some degree, perhaps it's the other very specialist stakeholder groups who've got the expertise and concern, and provided they do this work within the coming 2 weeks. So don't leave it till the very last day of the consultation. Bring it to either our attention or to Ofcom's attention rather quicker, and then we can take a view on it.
Will the RSGB be publishing its response to this consultation to the membership?
Absolutely. So all responses, including our historic response from 7 years ago on the 2015 one and more recently on the EMF one, are still today on the RSGB website. And in fact, it was interesting for me to look back at stuff we wrote 7 or 8 years ago on intermediate call sign changes and secondary locators, funnily enough. The circumstances are different, but they're there, and some of those arguments may still be valid. So we may not be able to publish, because it's going to be quite a detailed thing, right down to line-by-line review of the draft licence. We may not be able to get that out terribly early, but I can assure you we're going to be transparent and publish the final result.
Okay, thank you.
And anything that goes out will presumably be put out as in the public domain, and so people will see our full response on the Ofcom list.
Yes, Ofcom undertake to publish the consultation responses, don't they, Murray? That's right.
Yes. So we've in the one of the previous major consultations, I think there was roughly either 1,500 or 1,800 replies. The smaller replies from individuals, they'll potentially combine together in some sort of collated Word document or what have you. Otherwise, their webmaster will probably have a heart attack. But the bigger individual ones, we've done this quite often. We did a response to Ofcom only a few weeks ago on something else. A few weeks later, that RSGB reply is public on the Ofcom website and is being added to our own website. So it's incredibly rare that, in fact, I don't think there's been a recent case where we've kept one private.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on fairly briefly, if I may, or quickly rather, because I'd like to get through quite a few other subjects in the time we've got available. This question from Simon Harris, who is G4WQG, DR102. Why are SES, Special Event Station NOVs, notice of variations, I'm trying to clarify some of the abbreviations, only available to full calls? This is a huge opportunity to getting amateur radio out to the public. I have a foundation holder in a scout group that can't operate a YOTA station.
I do wonder about that, because in principle he could be operating under a full person's call sign as part of the supervision arrangements. So
okay, well, if that's possibly maybe
yes, the foundation holder wouldn't be able to directly hold the NOV himself, but the standard solution is to have an SES attached to a club call, and that club call can authorise any other member of the club under that full club holder, including lower level licensees.
Okay, thank you, Murray. I'm going to go for ask for some fairly quick fire answers if I can. So maybe one of you can answer each one, whoever you feel is most appropriate. Tony Hall asks, is it compulsory to change 2E1 or 2E0 calls to M8 or M9 calls, or is it voluntary? Brackets, I have read the document but would like clarification.
I saw that question go past, so I found the relevant part. It's 4.13 in the document. The interesting wording they've got, though, is they say they're not proposing at this stage that existing licensees must give up their existing one. So there is a bit of a sort of a hint towards the future, but at the moment they say it's optional. I know there was a lot of discussion before, a lot of groups discussing whether Ofcom were actually going to do away with the intermediate licenses beforehand. They say right at the beginning of their consultation document that they're sticking with the 3 levels. So I saw that one go past as well, but it just says at this stage, optional at this stage. Murray, anything to add?
Yeah, no, it's for intermediates in particular to reply to this question. There's not much point having full licensees reply to this. We expect an element of popularity because some people just don't like the 2 calls. Clearly, for any new exam pass, this time next year or whenever, those will be M8 or M9 straight away. What we feel here is that there are 2 issues. One is that sort of slightly vague wording gives us uncertainty. So if there's going to be a transition period, I'd rather have it defined personally.
Yeah.
Or the other thing is, if you're running parallel call sign systems, it gets very messy in the main license document, including on the RSL thing, because for the existing intermediates, they have to include their RSL. That's absolutely mandatory. Otherwise, those 2 series calls are illegal. Okay. What it's now going to have to discuss with Ofcom, and whether or not Ofcom are asked, we might even ask Ofcom to run up a second quick follow-on consultation about, are they all changed together, or can you define, say, a 3 or a 5 year period, or whatever that transition may be?
At the risk of taking us slightly sideways, there's some other things that are relevant at this point. I think Ofcom say that they're going to reserve those suffixes, don't they, for people to actually change. But of course, there's also another part of the consultation we talked about where they're asking people to people will be required to give up their foundation or intermediate if they've moved to full. So there's a whole load of change that's going on around here, and I really want to encourage everybody to go and revalidate their licenses. Now would be a fantastic time to go and do that before all of this change happens. So I just didn't want to miss that opportunity just to mention it.
An area that people might want to comment on in this is that I believe the text says that they will only hold your suffix on reserve for 3 years. Interestingly enough, not a 2 or anything else, because I thought they wanted consistencies of times. But anyway, they're only going to hold it for 3 years. If they then make it mandatory later on, then there's going to be a problem with people sort of saying, I'm quite used to having ABC. And why can't I have M8 ABC like you said? So I think this is very much an area where the people with intermediate call signs need to respond and state their positions. I'm also a bit worried if it happens a long time in the future. I can imagine it happening because they want to simplify their IT system and they've only got a handful of people or something or other. I can see it causing all sorts of consternation and heartache, because people by that stage will be perhaps quite a bit older and will now be quite confused and upset at losing a call sign that they've had for perhaps all of their amateur radio life. So I think this needs a bit of input to Ofcom to try and get some clarification, and it probably needs to be a quick changeover or a license for life, as it were.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stewart. Going to move on with some other questions. This is one about the practicalities of actually responding to the consultation from Rick M0LEP. Do you leave the yes, no blank, or put no and then do a long but in the comments, or what? He asks.
Yes, I would suggest that's what you do. You put no and then qualified.
Right.
Because if
Yeah, I
you
was
put
going to ask
yes,
Murray that because I was having trouble myself today. Murray, what do you think?
Yeah. So beware of approval by silence or just saying yes to something. So if you have a concern, definitely say no and then qualify it, because in fact, as I mentioned, some of these questions may have 3 items. They may have a whole pile of items behind them. So you might just want to refer to one specific paragraph or clause where your problem is, because you might be happy with some other aspects near it. But yes, be very careful. We understand that they won't have that many staff reading through the X hundreds of responses. So it's got to be very clear and keep it succinct. Please don't write essays.
Okay, thank you very much. Going back to RSLs, just a bit of information, really useful survey which Essex Hams did. And it says that our survey reveals the following on RSLs. 17% strongly agree with the Ofcom proposals to make them mandatory. 43% agree, 11% disagree, and 12% strongly disagree. So I'll read that again. It's 17% strongly agree, 43% agree, so that's a total of what, 60, I think? Yeah, 60% agree.
Is that for mandatory or optional, David?
That's for mandatory, to make them mandatory. So that's 60% approximately agree or strongly agree, 11% disagree, and 12% strongly disagree. So that's just a feeling from a survey that Essex Ham gave. Thank you for sharing that survey with us, Essex Hams. From Terence, 2E0 IPK, I was M6 IPK and then became 2E0 IPK. I have to say that I much preferred the M6 IPK. I went up to Scotland and used MM6 IPK. It was easy enough. Why does this need to change? It's easy to add when needed. So I think we're back to that again, and I think hopefully you agree with us, Terence, that we've covered that. Got a few quick fire questions I'd like to ask you to answer, if I can, the panel. Maybe just one person could answer them, whoever you feel most comfortable with. So here they go. I hold a full license. Is it true that I'll be able to run 1 kilowatt on all bands when the new license comes into effect?
No, it's not.
No, only on primary bands.
Read the schedule and read the schedule. It's quite detailed.
Okay, fine. So it's not quite as straightforward as that. What effect do you think the new licence will have on the way we demonstrate amateur to others at public events? Amateur radio, sorry, to others at public events.
Stewart, go for it.
I think it's going to have a tremendous and positive effect. I mean, just take, for example, the NRC. You'll be, if you get someone who's interested, you'll be able to actually get them to actually have a go on the radio. If I think about my grandchildren who've sort of looked over my shoulder when I've been doing FT8 because they think it's a video game, I'll be able to actually let them have a go on the keyboard and try and do it. I'll be able to set a challenge, see how long it takes you to work 5 countries or something, and you sort of build enthusiasm. I think we'll have the days of people sitting with their backs to the audience and working DX on a key, for example, where people just kind of look on, will change to the days where you can invite people to come in and have a go. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that's entirely correct. I remember my first sight and sound of amateur radio was when I was about 11 and I went to GB2SM, the Science Museum in London, and they had the special event or the permanent special event station running, and I hadn't a clue what's going on and no one explained it to me. The guy sat with his back to me and operated away and I had no notion. So yes, it'll make a big change.
All right, so that sounds unanimously good news from the panel's point of view. Another quick question for you. Ofcom is proposing that anyone can set up a repeater or internet gateway. Will this free-for-all approach not create chaos?
Yes, it could, and that's why we're looking at how we can actually encourage coordination, more or less the way it is done now, and looking carefully also at the band plan to make sure there are frequencies specifically allocated for those purposes. Murray, you want to say more?
Yeah, so we mentioned that by specifically allocating channels for low power use, you get great efficiency, and separating them from the main network, particularly for repeaters, is the way forward. For gateways, we've already got quite a lot of gateway channels. We'll look at sort of improving some of those, but it's that sort of new repeater category, I think, is the one you need to look at.
All right, thank you for that. How is the existing repeater network going to be protected by the proliferation of low-power, uncoordinated repeaters that may spring up?
It's exactly the same answer, really.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. And also linked to gateways and repeaters is the proposed 5-watt power level for uncoordinated gateways and repeaters not too high?
I think it's a bit high for 2 meters. 5 watts goes an awful long way, especially if you're well sighted. Probably okay on 70 SEMS, but it goes a long way, so we need to be careful about that. Ofcom might be persuaded to do something about that. We obviously don't want to turn the power down where it's not usable, but 5 watts might be a bit high on 2 meters especially, but whether they want to do it on a band for band basis, I'm not sure. What do you think, Murray?
Yeah, well, it is an ERP, so you are meant to sort of wind your transmitter power back a little bit. The one thing we do want to encourage here, and it is a discussion with Ofcom as well, is to get these activating bands that they've had difficulty accessing before. So 2 meters already today has got a fair number of assignments, and as we know, 50 megahertz in Europe is seen as the future for some of this stuff, and removing the issues around being unattended in 70 SEMS in 430 megs is very dear to our hearts, which would also create a lot more flexibility, and even 23 centimeters, which, although it's got challenges elsewhere, we believe that certainly for some of the newer equipment appearing in the market, it might be an attractive thing for sort of smaller networks as well.
Yeah, very much. And key to some of this will be, especially in 70 SEMS, negotiation with the primary users to make sure there are frequencies cleared which can be used by anyone, almost anywhere.
Yeah, thank you. Steve G8SFR has said, are packet radio mailboxes and packet radio nodes included in the proposals for gateways and repeaters? No mention is made of packet radio in the Ofcom document.
Correct. That sort of wording was too technology specific. So provided when we review the detailed definitions of what they do have, actually covers not just those uses, but nodes, mesh, all sorts of things, LoRa, you name it. There's a whole pile of stuff that just has to fit the appropriate category and definition correctly. And we can already see a few issues, but be assured that those sorts of things are included. The issue is, are they included correctly, I think.
Yeah, okay. I think we've covered a lot of the questions. There are a few questions I've left. Some of those are really we're going to deal more with for next week. Foundation and we've actually I'll mention this here. Essex Hams have also said our survey reveals the 2 most opposed changes. So this might interest people, but obviously make your own minds up and respond. Question 6, the reuse of call signs, of which 41% oppose that. And question 5, suffix removal. 32% oppose that, but of course, as always, you need to make your own minds up about that. On questions on, and what about people with awards and certificates? This is from William GI8WFA. What about people with awards and certificates? Not a nice move to somewhat nullify them by changing their call sign suffix after many years of use. Can someone take that quickly for us, please?
Well, most awards allow you to use all of the call signs you ever owned to contribute to the award. So I don't really quite understand it.
Okay, well, I'm sorry if we haven't got that right. We have run out of time, though, I think. And some of the questions I said that we haven't answered, they were more akin to, more relevant to the foundation and intermediate, which we'll be covering more next week. We'll be back with you again. But I think that's about all we've got time for tonight. I'd like to say thank you very much to our panel tonight, to John, Stewart, Murray, and to Steve. Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes the first of 2 special forums on the Ofcom licensing reviews. And as I said, thanks very much to our panel. And thank you to you for asking questions and taking part this evening. Lots of great questions. Sorry if we didn't read yours out, but there's still another chance next week, because we'll be back next Monday, the August the 7th, at the same time and place for part 2, which will be focusing on foundation and intermediate topics, including call sign and exam changes, as well as the consultation clauses, which may lead to new opportunities for outreach activities for everyone. Information on this and much more RSGB guidance and support on this consultation can be found at rsgb.org/license review. Our regular monthly Tonight at 8 webinars will also be back starting in September the 4th, when Peter Burton, G3ZPB, will tell us all about the Minos contest logging software. Now, if you'd like to see details of future webinars or watch recordings of previous programs in the series, please visit rsgb.org/webinars, where you can also send us comments and feedback. And if you subscribe to the RSGB's YouTube channel, you'll be notified of all upcoming Tonight at 8 webinars, as well as other new videos and presentations from the Society on a wide range of amateur radio topics. Until next Monday, this is David, G7URP, signing off and clear. Bye-bye.